Russell Wilson was, of course, released from the Denver Broncos after the 1 year stand with Sean Payton and is now signing, or has signed rather, a 1 year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Broncos will pay $38 million of his salary in 2024, while Pittsburgh will kind of have an embarrassment of riches for everyone else, only having to pay Russell Wilson $1.2 million. Do you think this was the best fit? And if you want to, give me some other landing spots that you possibly had in mind for Russell Wilson.
I think overall, I think this is probably was one of the strongest fits that Russell Wilson had. I mean, I think you got a situation where they're unsettled at quarterback. We don't know if Kenny Pickett is the guy. They did right before this show trade Deontay Johnson, so they're having to figure that out.
Okay, so he was on the block. He was on the move.
So they have to figure that out. So I think this is a good situation for Russ. Russ knew he was going to play on a vet min for another team. So at the end of the day, it was just about what he felt was the best fit for him. And, maybe him and Arthur Smith can make some magic together in Pittsburgh. They're going to compete, obviously, with Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson. But I think everybody looks at this as Russell Wilson's job to win.
Right.
But if Kenny Pickett wins, then obviously that may be a good sign for him. So Pittsburgh may look at this as, we either have the veteran or our young player steps up. So I think overall this is the best place. I mean, other places that you could look at, maybe Atlanta, but obviously we saw what they did, which we'll talk about later. Outside of that, maybe Minnesota, obviously with that move. But it seems like this may have been Russell Wilson's best fit.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. I called it maybe about a month or so back on the show. I was like, look, Russell Wilson needs to go align with that Steelers culture, get under Mike Tomlin. This was before Arthur Smith was brought into the mix. But, overall, I felt like this was a pretty solid spot for him, and I thought it was going to be the best fit for him, as well. This is more of a well-rounded culture, at least over the last few years, compared to what the Denver Broncos have done. Now, of course, they have that most recent Super Bowl championship with Peyton Manning in the 2015-2016 year. And I agree with you. The Falcons could have been a good one as well. I don't know about Raheem Morris as a coach, and I mentioned that in previous episodes as well. And I do think Zach Robinson as the OC would have been, pretty solid with Russell Wilson for sure. And then even the Minnesota Vikings before we kind of saw them disbanding in free agency. And I don't even know if that's going to be a desirable landing spot. People still don't know about the Justin Jefferson contract, and that was kind of one of those big pulling points as well. Could we imagine Russell Wilson to a Justin Jefferson? It could be possibly insane. But I like that you bring up Arthur Smith. I want to piggyback off of that a little bit because people are kind of on my back about this, but I'm not sold as of right now in today's NFL of Arthur Smith being an effective play caller. I understand he was at the mercy of Marcus Mariota for 13 games, Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, but you're talking about, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Tyler Algier, all of those defensive players, but focusing on the offense wasn't putting up much of, really a fight out there. 3 straight 7 and 10 years. And this is the biggest tagline for me about Arthur Smith. His 3 years with the Atlanta Falcons calling plays was not better than the final year of Dan Quinn when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, and of course kind of deteriorating with that Matt Ryan figure. And I believe that, Arthur Smith could be solid for Russell Wilson, but I don't know, maybe he just got thrown into a head coaching position that wasn't too solid. But I'm a little skeptical of Arthur Smith now controlling a veteran in Russell Wilson. He had a little bit of a hand on Ryan Tannehill, who had the lightning in a bottle season, and then he dealt with some of the rough quarterback play in Atlanta. But the Arthur Smith part is definitely something that, kind of worries me here. Now, what are your thoughts on Russell Wilson out of all places to go? And again, maybe there was only 3 or 4 teams in the league. What are your thoughts on him joining literally the toughest division in the National Football League, Bryce?
This really isn't new. I mean, if you think about where he just came from, people considered Denver in one of the toughest divisions of football, dealing with Kansas City, dealing with, the Chargers, even though they haven't been what people expected talent-wise. Every season you viewed them as a top team from a roster perspective. I mean, even the Raiders, even though they've been up and down, you never know what they could do.
Right.
So it's not really new for him. And then remember, he played during the peak NFC West with Seattle. 49ers were on top, Rams, all them. So this isn't new to him. He's used to playing hard-nosed football. He honestly is used to playing in ugly games. I don't even know if you remember the games, especially when they would always play the Panthers when he was in Seattle. Always would be 13-15, 18-15, ugly defensive showdowns. So I'm not surprised that the division is so tough and he's going to be able to handle that. I think Russell Wilson is in a position right now where, listen, if you look at his stats from last year, it looks great, even though
solid season he did.
Yeah, exactly. But we know that Russell Wilson isn't that special Russell Wilson. That's the difference. He's gone from special to just good. And I think that's been the issue when you're a quarterback who's been at the top for so long and then you're not. So I think you could still play well. And this realistically, you could view this as Russell Wilson's quote unquote maybe last chance to prove that, oh, wait, he could still be a starting quarterback. He can win you games. He can still make the postseason. And then we'll see what happens. Pittsburgh is a great place to do it. You know, they're always going to be well coached. Defense, the best in the league. So he's going to have those elements that he had in Seattle and Denver here in Pittsburgh. And now all he has to do is make it work with George Pickens, Arthur Smith, and see what those results turn out to be.
Yeah, he does have definitely a nice pickings of culture and talent as well. Guys, we got 48 people live with us, by far a record here on the show. Y'all make sure to like and subscribe, share the show wherever you're watching, at the NFL with AJL, at Bricey, BRICEY_2K. Check him out on social media as well. I want to make sure that we get all of the content out to you guys. A lot of people viewing us on Twitter right now, so I really appreciate y'all tapping in there. Y'all go ahead and get into the chat too. But I got to agree with you, Bryson, and I kind of – I feel ashamed to admit this, but with all of the media just going around Russell Wilson saying how he's washed, which I don't believe, and just all of the negative talk about him, it kind of makes you forget that he did play in the height of the NFC West and did have those 35, 40 plus passing touchdowns years. You know, of course, he was never in the MVP conversation later in the season. Unfortunately, we know about how he hasn't received a single MVP vote. But then when he went to the AFC West as well, he was in there with Patrick Mahomes. He was in there with, I think it was Derek Carr at the time. And then also, Justin Herbert. So he has definitely stepped up to the plate throughout his career. And you're 100% correct. This isn't really anything out of the norm. I love how bold it is, though, because, I feel like when he went from Seattle to Denver, it was a rough exit, right? But now going from Denver to Pittsburgh, it's even rougher, and people have lower expectations. They don't have as many positive thoughts about Russell Wilson in this limelight. And just for him to come out here, basically play on that 1.2 million veteran minimum, kind of betting on himself in a way, because if he loses a damn quarterback battle to Kenny Pickett, we're having an entire another conversation. And at that point, I don't know how much more that I'll be able to defend Russell Wilson, to be honest with you, man. But I really think he has a chance to reignite something here in Pittsburgh, like he was looking to do in Denver. But, he wasn't really handled well. Stepping up to the plate in this moment in the AFC North, yes, I had to think for a second. He's still trying to prove that he's him. I still believe that he is him. I said it last year at one point mid-season. Sean Payton had fixed Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was back playing at that top 10, at worst top 12 quarterback range. Let's touch a little bit on the departure from Denver. Do you believe Denver handled the situation correctly, which ultimately made him arrive in Pittsburgh?
I think there's a lot of controversy around it, obviously, because they're trying to get him to get off money so they don't have to pay it, so they can save money.
They want it out of that contract.
Exactly. And I think it's one of those things where when you look at that situation, it kind of shows you the dark side of the business. It shows you what business dealings can be like.
Right.
Imagine in the middle of a season where a team, especially if you're the team, you're thinking we're trying to be competitive. They go on that winning streak. They get back to 500. And then your coach is coming out talking to their quarterback saying, hey, we kind of don't want you to play no more, so we don't have to. You either have to get rid of the money that we have to pay you. You can make that decision, or we just don't play you.
Yep.
Because imagine if you're a teammate and you're thinking, wait, we're just going to give up the season because y'all don't want to pay him money.
Right.
Y'all want to give up, I think, his injury settlement clause in his contract.
Yeah,
it's one of those things, man, where you just kind of view it and just like, wow, this is kind of a little messy. So the departure wasn't the best, obviously, and Denver could have handled it better. And I mean, Russell's talked about it too before. So because he has no issues with the players, his issues with ownership, management, and Sean Payton.
Yep, the three that he did not think in his departure as he went on into year 13 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I totally agree, man. It was messy. It could have went a lot better. Me seeing how Sean Payton handled Russell Wilson was a little enlightening, but maybe not in the good sense to me, because we understand, him and Drew Brees really built New Orleans into what it was when we were there. We never heard stories of him and Drew kind of going back and forth with each other, stop kissing babies, benching Drew in the middle of the season if he wasn't playing well to avoid injury, settlements, which of course is a different situation. But it definitely surprised me with the way Sean Payton had come into Denver and ran things, because I had said Sean Payton and Russell Wilson are going to bring things out of each other that we have never seen before from both of them. And I had these guys in the AFC Championship game. I wouldn't have been shocked shocked if they were able to make a Super Bowl. High expectations in a first year with a new coach and Sean Payton taking a year off and going to Denver. But I got to say, man, it wasn't handled well, not at all. First year, he had the brand new owner. The team was just sold, brand new head coach and Nathaniel Hackett. We saw how awful that was. We understand how bad that coaching job was historically. And while Russell Wilson didn't play his best, it wasn't all his fault in that year. He did have a long time holding onto the football. The time to release was one of the lower ones in the league. But it was just like Arthur Smith coming out of Atlanta. Nathaniel Hackett was not cut to be a head coach. Now, Arthur Smith lasted 3 full seasons, and Nate Hackett, I think, got 14, 15 games under his belt before they just let him go, towards the end of the year. And then you come in with another head coach who we just talked about, Sean Payton, kind of doing him dirty, stop kissing babies, ripping him publicly, the camera cut to him on the sidelines. I don't have a problem with a head coach getting into their quarterback on the sideline because that's your captain. That's the guy you paid the most money to. He probably sells the most tickets in the seats, barring if you have a, Justin Jefferson or maybe a Derrick Henry on certain types of teams. And it really bothered me when Sean Payton came out and basically quote, well, 2 things. He's on the herd, right? This is when we're kind of speculating where Sean Payton's going to go. He's already finished his, year of retirement, leaving the Saints, his, whole offseason off. And he's talking about how if he's got Russell Wilson, he would line up all of his hits and his best moves, kind of alluding it to music and saying, like, I would get the most out of Russell Wilson. I would make sure that he's highly successful. And then you go on and treat him like this. And the decision to bench him because of the injury stuff might have been from, higher ups in the front office and management. But for him to say, quote, I can't bench the entire wide receiver room. I can't bench the entire offensive line. Just come out and say what you mean and mean what you say, Sean Payton in Denver. We understand that the haul that you put up for him with all of the picks that went to Seattle, the production was not matching up to that contract. So when you look at that from an eagle's eye view, it was pretty simple that they wanted to get out of that deal because we know one of the most valuable things in the NFL, look at the embarrassment of riches with San Francisco, is a cheap/rookie quarterback contract. Once you have to pay these guys a lot, you're going to have to make decisions. And it's going to be interesting too to see what Denver does for the quarterback play. But you even look at Russell Wilson. He had to go through another scheme, another offensive coordinator with Sean Payton, which clearly didn't work out. But Russell Wilson had the same number of total touchdowns as Lamar Jackson. Lamar had 29 touchdowns. Russ had 29 touchdowns and 16 turnovers. Lamar had 29 touchdowns and 11 turnovers, including interceptions and fumbles. And maybe it's not the same comparison, or not maybe because I know it's not, but Russell Wilson had more total touchdowns than Patrick Mahomes. We talk about tops of production for quarterbacks. So it wasn't that Russell Wilson wasn't performing. We know that numbers all that they're, that's not all that they're supposed to crack. They're not all that they're cracked up to be. But like I just said, Sean Payton had fixed him midseason. People on YouTube agreed with me. He was a top 10 to 12 quarterback and kind of back in his element. This was starting to be the Russell Wilson, hopefully, that we were coming to see. But before we get off this topic, man, give me how many wins you think Pittsburgh's going to have? Do they make the playoffs? And if so, what's the depth that's happening with it? And if you've got a potential first-year stat line for Russell Wilson with the Steelers.
It feels like every year when we count Pittsburgh out, because they've started slow the last couple of years, they seem to heat up, they get hot, they get things right. So I don't see this year being any different. So I would say 9-10 wins, just based off how they've been, because defense is going to be there. That's going to win them games, And then like I said, it's about making enough plays. If they make enough plays offensively, they're going to have a chance. They're going to have a chance to be in every game this year. So I think about 9-10 wins will be a good season for them. Don't know if that would win the division, but that may be probably good enough to get you a wild card. I know AFC was stacked last year. We'll see what that means this year. Right. Russell Wilson this year, I mean, if he had 29 touchdowns last year, I would think in this offense, again, depending on what happens with the receiving core, depending on what they do now, I could see him being in that range, 25 to 30 touchdowns this season. Like I said, if unless because the thing is that I'm saying this assuming that they're going to throw the football because Arthur Smith
to run building first. Now.
Exactly. Because Arthur Smith's a run first coach.
Right.
So
he is.
We'll see. So I'm saying 25 to 30 touchdowns for Russell Wilson. Probably around the same turnovers, 10 to 15.
Right.
Obviously, those ugly games that you can play in Pittsburgh snow, that can add to the total a little bit. But that's what I'm looking at right there. And I think it may be one of those things where Russell just gets comfortable early. Him and Arthur Smith try to figure it out. And then if Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson get on the same page, you'll start to see probably Pittsburgh middle of the season start stacking wins and making that push to the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I'm gonna take it a tick up on the wins. I could see about 10 or 11 wins, so really about in the same ballpark as you. I
Mm,
think they'll have losses to Kansas City, the Chargers, the Cowboys, and then I think they'll split the divisional games with the Browns, the Bengals, and then of course the Ravens as well. Being
mm,
one of the toughest, if not like we said, the toughest division in football. I could see them hitting a wild card or a possibly divisional round as well, and I think he'll have around 4,000 yards passing, maybe about 450, 550 rushing yards, a few rushing touchdowns to go with that too. And like you said, if he was able to put up, 20, what was it, 27, 28 passing touchdowns last year, what is he going to be able to do under a Mike Tomlin culture within a Steelers defense that's actually going to be able to back him up and not have to make him sweat, have more efficient
mm,
drives, having that talent at his disposal with a Najee, with a Jalen Warren, obviously a George Pickens, and who knows what the Steelers are going to do as free agency moves forward. It would have been kind of sick to see Mike Evans go there. We're going to talk about his re-signing with Tampa later on in the show. But yeah, I think Russell Wilson's going to have a pretty solid year. I think it could be on par with the not recent years of Russell Wilson that we saw in Seattle, but it'll be not too terribly far from it. But y'all let us know what you think of the first topic here as we chopped it up. Russell Wilson going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Definitely was a crazy move. Like Bryce and I said, we could have maybe seen Atlanta, maybe Minnesota,
mm.
but a month or so back, it was like, man, this just really felt like it was the best landing spot for Russell Wilson.